Community Church this morning. It is always a pleasure to have you here. We're in a series called The Unexpected Adventure, Surprises on the Footpath of Life. And maybe you've had some of those surprises in your life. Some of them maybe not so positive. Some of them maybe more positive than others and encouraging. And God has ways of dropping into the footpath of our lives people, conversations, experiences, news, some things that seem coincidental, and yet God uses them so many times. So you can be encouraged this morning that life is an unexpected adventure. And for all the adventuresome and all those who are gearing up for another summer season, I think you're in for a good psalm this morning because it's a traveler's psalm. Psalm 120 last week was a psalm of disorientation. It's a psalm it starts with distress and stress, and it leaves things unresolved. Things really aren't taken care of. It's not a real neat and tidy psalm. Well, what that was last week, a psalm of disorientation, the opposite psalm of 121 is on the other side of the spectrum this week. It's a psalm of orientation. It's a psalm of orientation toward God. So I know that Memorial Day weekend is a great weekend for a lot of things, and it seems like from Memorial Day through Labor Day, there's a lot of traveling, there's a lot of vacations planned, there's a lot of trips, road trips and longer trips and things, and we just really need the protecting hand of God. In fact, last evening, we're getting ready to send Will to Senegal, Africa. In fact, Donette took him here this morning to Fort Wayne. He'll go to Fort Knox, fly out of there, and be in Senegal, Africa for about a month on a humanitarian mission with the Army. And so last evening, I didn't unpack all of the psalm, but I said, hey, I got something I want to read before you take off. And so we just sat together and we read at the supper table Psalm 121. In fact, I think what I'll do, it's sometimes easier to work through a psalm or a biblical passage if you've read it recently and it's kind of fresh in your thinking. So let's take a moment to read through this whole psalm. It's just a few verses, 7-8 verses or so. We'll read it together. And I want you to note in this psalm, and I think I've noted the words in red. And you're going to see those. Go to the next slide for me. Let me make sure. Maybe it's not as easy to see on the screen. If we go to the next slide, we have words in. There we go. Maybe. But I want you to see the phrase. There we go. Watches over. Maybe it's not as easy to see on the screen, but it's in red for a reason. About 5 times we see this phrase, watches over. Watches over. And some of you I know are big mushroom hunters, right? And you've probably sat and observed, and you found you some morel mushrooms. I didn't find any this year, but some of you found some really big ones, okay? I hope they were good in your frying pan. I hope you enjoyed them, all right? They're really good things. But sometimes I feel like that. I stand back from a passage, and it's like looking for a morel mushroom. What is the secret? What is the interpretive key? What is the unique phrase that keeps reoccurring that gives us indication as to the meaning of the psalm? In this case, a psalm. What is it? And so as you stand back and you look and you observe and you look for little parts of something, pieces of something, just a little glimpse of something that will lead you to something greater, kind of like looking for a mushroom, okay? But looking for a biblical mushroom this week, I noticed this phrase, watches over, in our passage. So let's go back to verse 1, just checking to make sure it's there. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? The psalmist writes, my help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Verse 4. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will never slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. Verse 7, the Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. Isn't that a wonderful psalm? What do you think this psalm is about? A God who watches over us. And it brings a lot of comfort, especially last week when we're looking at our psalm of disorientation, where it starts with distress, it ends with war and a lot of unrest, and there's lack of shalom in the whole psalm. And now this through hiker, this OT through hiker we've been looking at here in this series, who understands that he cannot stay in the land of Meshech. He cannot live any longer in the land of Kedar. He knows that unless he does something radical in his life and begins a through journey toward God, that the hot spots of life will eat him alive. In fact, he was already picturing God's judgment on all the people that hurt him in his life and all the people that lied to him in his life. And that's life for all of us. You see, that's where we were last week. But this week, we reorient ourselves, and our OT through hiker is beginning a journey, a through hike up to Jerusalem. On slide 7, if we look on slide 7, he mentioned these places. Asia Minor was the land of Meshech. Kedar is down in the Arabian desert, down in the where it says the Old Testament world, down in that area. And depending on where he was coming from would depend on a lot of different terrain that this guy, this through hiker, would have seen. If he was coming from Meshech, he would have seen some incredible mountain vistas and horizons coming from this area. And the topo map here just kind of helps you picture that. Coming from really any direction except for the directly to the east in the Arabian desert, he would have seen some very, very beautiful, beautiful terrain. But it would also have been very rugged, very scary, and very uncertain. Would have produced a level of uncertainty in this through hiker because he didn't really know what was all out in front of him. And so last week he sets out on a journey. He realizes, if I'm going to get peace, if I'm going to find shalom, I've got to make a journey. And it's a journey that he's going to make, and he's looking out ahead. And as he pauses on his walking stick and he looks and he sees the horizon, and he realizes that, this is very beautiful, yes, but there are robbers potentially out there. There are stalkers on the trail. There are perhaps wolves. There are treacherous passageways. There are idolatrous shrines in the hills, and we'll say more about that in just a moment. All of these things where he could slip and fall. He's making a journey toward God. He realizes that ultimately this thing climaxes in Jerusalem, where he will have a God encounter that will mark him for life, that hopefully will help heal the hot spots of his life. But he understands also that he needs a lot of help on the journey before he gets there. And so foremost in the hiker's mind is this question of, who's going to help me? Who might show up with some trail magic in my life that will get me to my destination? And what might it be? So he says, verse 1 again, I lift up my eyes. It's very poetic, guys. When we normally, if we want to express this, I looked at the mountains. That's kind of how we would say it, right? I looked at the mountain vista or the panoramic view. He says, I lifted up my eyes. It's very deliberate. It's a poetic way. He takes his eyes and he pulls them up in a very deliberate, poetic expression. I lift up my eyes. I look in a very deliberate, steady, resolved manner. I look to the mountains, and when I'm looking at the mountains and the horizons and the dangerous, treacherous passageways that I'll be going through, I have this question, where does my help come from? So I lift up my eyes, first person, right? Where does my help come from? And that's important because when we get to verse 3, it's going to kick to third person. I'll tell you why in just a second. I lift up my eyes, he says. I look to the horizon. Maybe there's better days ahead. Maybe the further I get from Meshach and Kedar and the attitudes of those habitations and those warring tribes, maybe I'll get closer and closer and I'll experience something really special that can transform my life. Maybe this through hike will clarify some things for me and get me out of this old way of thinking. But then again, realistically, he says, maybe I'll be challenged, and maybe the miles ahead, the twists, the turns, the surprises. In fact, he's not sure how it will all come together. So he pauses on the trail and he looks up in a very deliberate manner and he says, where does my help come from? I know that there may be others on the journey too. And if my timing is right, God may very wonderfully provide through other through hikers that leave a little trail magic on the trail. Stuff along the way that I didn't pack and I never planned for, but God does it. And we talked about trail magic. Slide 3, we talked about that. And how that sometimes there's the discovery of things unexpected. And that's what we see throughout these Psalms of Ascent, is God shows up in unexpected ways. And the way he does trail magic in this through hiker's life, who's trying to make a break from the old way of thinking to a new way of doing life, the way God shows up is the unexpected, surprising showing up of an unexpected through hiker. And we'll see that in verse 3. But when we look to the mountains, back to verse 1, when we look to the mountains, we see beauty, and rightly so. Slide number 10. Jump to slide 10 and 11. Just flash those up. I mean, mountains are beautiful. They're rugged. I don't think there's any place I can really go that would just put me in touch with God more than the mountains and being lost in the mountains. It's where God meets me many times. I love encountering him in this way. And so they're very beautiful. But the Hebrew, especially the OT through hiker, he saw so much more than just the beauty. Okay? The land, it was overrun by pagan shrines. Many of these shrines would set up in these mountain peaks because they felt that the higher up they could go, the closer they could be to their deity. And so they would set up the shrines. There would be shrines throughout the journey that you might encounter. Shrines where there were sacred prostitutes that would be there to lure you into their, quote unquote, their acts of worship. There would be nostrums and protections and spells and enchantments against all the perils of the road. And so if you were afraid of the sun or maybe getting a sunstroke, you would go to the sun deity and offer your sacrifices, and his protection hopefully would then accompany your life. If you were afraid at night, maybe you would go to the moon deity and offer your sacrifices and thus have the protection of the moon deity. If you were afraid of demons and minions that might trip you up, cause you to fall on your journey, then you would go to the appropriate deity and entreat their aid. But look at verse 2. Look at our OT through hiker. My help comes from Yahweh the Lord. My help. I don't need pills. I don't need fortune cookies. I don't even need the pornography of a fertility cult shrine to help me make my journey toward God, the maker of heaven and earth. That's who I need help from. He'll be my help. He's going to be my aid. God is your maker, and that's huge. But does he condescend to see our through hikes of life? Does he condescend? Many times our through hikes feel more like soap operas than anything. Does this maker of heaven and earth pay attention to my life? Is he engaged in the steps of my journey? Does he give me the strength I need to make the next step? Does he watch over me as I look for places to find rest and restoration? As I'm trying to pick out campsites and stay on the trail and follow the markers and avoid all the stuff that could sidetrack me from my OT through hike to God. Verse 3 says, Yes, he's engaged. He will not let your foot slip. The Hebrew word is references sliding or falling. It also references trembling or staggering. So the picture is of a trembling, weak hiker that's hiked a long way and his legs are weak. And most of the time when we fall because we've hiked a long way and we're weak and we're headed downhill. It seems like every time I take a fall on a through hike, it's usually when I'm headed downhill and I'm tired. A little twig or something gets underneath the leaves and you can't see it and it rolls with you and then you go down. And if you're with somebody and they see it, you bounce back up and say, now for my next trick. Okay? That's one way you can handle that. It's very embarrassing. If you're not with somebody, you just lay there. Okay? You just lay there and just kind of start feeling, am I okay? Am I all right? Everything move? And is there sharp pain? Are there sharp pains anywhere? Right? That's kind of how you handle that. All right? But usually when we've hiked a long way on the journey, we're tired, we're weary, our legs give out and we fall. He who watches over you, though, will not slumber. Now I want you to see something here. Okay, God is watching where our foot lands, and He's watching and He sees our weak and trembling legs after hours of hiking. He sees this. But I want you to see something else in verse 3, and it's a very subtle change. It's from first person to third person, and you almost don't recognize it because you're caught up in the poetry of the passage. Notice the subtle change. See, in verses 1 through 2, he's all about I will lift up my eyes to the hills from whence cometh my help. Right? My help comes from the Lord. So he's eyeing and mying. But somebody evidently on this OT through hiker's journey slips up beside him, and maybe he slips up beside him just as the guy slips in the mud on the trail. And he kind of slips in the mud a little bit. And there's a long pause. And evidently, he's been speaking. He stopped and he spoke these words out loud. And maybe he's kind of reciting these words over and over. Where will my help come from? And where will my help come from? And he's saying it out loud. He's taking step after step. And he almost falls. And then, right at that very moment, verse 3, some guy emerges from maybe a pine thicket or something somewhere. He kind of hears this thing going on in this through hiker's mind and through his mouth. The words he's saying, the prayer he's praying, these wonderful words he's mulling over on his hike. And this guy shows up from a thicket somewhere with a big toothy smile. And we'll just call him Colgate. We'll give him the trail name Colgate. This big grin. And he steps up beside this through hiker who's just about fallen. And he says in third person, He, the Lord, will not let your foot slip. So he starts talking about this through hiker's feet, who's been saying these words to himself. It switches from first person to third person. Very subtle, but it's God's way of interjecting trail magic into this person's hike early on in the process. He, the Lord, he starts talking about his feet, his foot. He, the Lord, verse 3, will not let your foot slip. And he points to them. He who watches over you will not slumber. And God is going to give you the traction you need, buddy. He'll give you the traction you need, ma'am. Many times that traction will come in the form of a through hiker buddy who reminds you to stay on the trail, that God is Creator God. He'll take care of you. You see that? Slide 5. Indeed, He who watches over Israel will never slumber, neither slumber nor sleep. He repeats the idea. God is not going to be indifferent to your situation. All of you will be going through, on your through hikes of life, guys, and you're going to round a bend someday. And in the trail, you're going to see some difficult things that you're going to have to go through. And you're going to encounter all of the stuff that seems to underscore your helplessness in life, and it will seem insurmountable to you at that moment. And God may appear to be indifferent, and it may be dizzying and energy depleting and discouraging and hot spot generating and all of these things that happen on our through hikes through life. But in that moment, Psalm 121 is the rope. Get a carabiner attached to it and stay on the journey. Don't forsake your help, the source of your aid. My helper, my God, my creator God. In fact, He watches over my steps, and when it comes to picking a place to bed down for the night, I know that I can pick the right spot. He's going to guide me to the right spots where I'll be safe and protected, maybe from impromptu storms that may rise up in the night. I'll have a roof over my head or provision from God. And in fact, He doesn't slumber, so I can sleep soundly because I know God is at work. See how this through hiker is finding encouragement and strength from his buddy who keeps talking to him in the third person. This is what God does. This is what He does. In fact, he says to him again in verse 5, Colgate points at him again and says, the Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. He'll give you a good night's rest. And not only that, He will give you a shady place to rest, to rejuvenate with some fellow through hikers on the trail in the hottest part of your day. And if you know Israel, and I've happened to have been there, and I know it's very hot climate in certain areas especially, and you know how important shade is. And after you pass through these high mountain peaks that are on the peripheral of Israel, then you get down into the wilderness desert areas, and it's a dry heat, and you're dehydrated in just a few minutes, really. It's just that kind of heat. You don't realize you're losing so much water, but you are. And so he understands something. And so he says, Colgate says to his buddy, his new buddy, the through hiker, who's trying to figure out how he's going to complete his journey, if he's got enough resources and everything to complete his journey. He says to him, he says, the Lord is your shade at your right hand. You don't stop. You keep, come on, I'm with you. We'll go all the way to Jerusalem. I'll be your through hiker buddy. We'll team up on this thing. You can get it done. And the Lord He's going to watch over you. He's going to be your shade at your right hand as you pass through the treacherous passageways of your life. In fact, I like how it's worded, this part of the poem. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. You know, the right hand is a position of honor and influence in the Bible. When someone stood at your right hand, for example, in a legal situation, they were your defender. That's how close God will be to you, says Colgate with his through hiker buddy. God is a shadow, as it were. He's shade, as it were, and He follows along with you. He influences you while you're on your journey. And so what we see here is that God is right there guiding every step of the way on your journey. He's shade at your right hand just when you need it, just when you feel like you're dehydrating, your head's starting to hurt, and you don't have vitamin I, ibuprofen. Right? We all need vitamin I every now and then. Okay? And you don't have that. And you're like, man, how am I going to make it? I feel so... I look to the hills and I'm wondering, the hills of my life, the mountain ranges and vistas of my life, and I don't know where the help's going to come from. I don't know. But I'm going to make a decision that God's going to be my helper. And I'm going to trust Him. And He's going to show up with trail magic just at the right moment. And I'm going to believe that of Him. You see, this is a resolve of the psalmist, Psalm 121. He's resolved. Last week, he's disoriented. He makes this journey. He starts out on the journey, and then he realizes what he's got himself into. And now God starts showing up already before we get very far into this thing. And in fact, Colgate tells him, the Lord is your shade at your right hand. He's grinning. He's encouraging. And in fact, you know, when we look at this, we have to understand that this psalm is not an exemption from trouble. You're going to pass through troubles. The phone is going to ring and you're going to wonder who it is. Okay? That's how, but God shows up in those phone calls. He shows up in those shadowy moments where we're not sure if He's with us or He's left us, or if He's indifferent or if He's engaged, if He's watching our steps and helping us in every part and aspect of the journey. See, God has promised The psalmist understands it. Colgate keeps reminding this guy, he's a shadowy presence that moves along with you. He guides you. He influences you to the left and the right. That's our God. That's our Yahweh God. Verse 6, the sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. Now, I have to be honest with you. The sun I get. It's an easy one. Too much exposure can harm you in many ways. Sunburn, heat stroke, dehydration. But what about the moon? Right? I mean, how, pray tell, can the moon harm me at night? Now, quite honestly, I've had a few people that mooned me in my life. And I survived it. I survived it okay. And those images have been burned in my memory. But God's grace, He's so good. And I can just somehow squeeze that memory out and focus on those beautiful mountain vistas. All right? All right? But what's the deal with the moon? How can that harm me at night? Well, one, if there's a full moon, it means that there's less clouds in the sky. And when it's a full moon night and you're trying to do a through hike, you know it's going to be colder that night because the cloud cover's not there to hold the heat down, right? So the full moon indicates a colder night. And the hike I went on this winter, it was a full moon that night. And we had no idea it was going to drop to 0 degrees that night. And I'm in a 20-degree bag. And I told you that story. And so I'm trying to survive. I'm building fires. I'm burning everything that I can find. And just like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. It's one of those things. Levi's, Will's, in their 0-degree bags. They're just, having a picnic in there. Okay? They're having fun. I'm in my 20-degree bag, and I'm building fires, buddy, because I want to be here tomorrow morning. Okay? Well, it was full moon that night. And it was beautiful, I have to say. Laying on my back. It's beautiful. No doubt about it. But it's cold. It's very cold. That's a full moon. It's very, very cold in a cloudless night. Okay, whether summer or winter time. It can cool down. And I think that's probably maybe part of the reference here. But secondly, here's something else I unearthed. All right? When the psalm was written, and the psalms were written, miscellaneous psalms were written from about 1500 BC to probably about 500 BC or so. Okay? So they're a collection of psalms written over several hundreds of years. And the way these psalms, of a sense, came to be used was they were used for through hikers making a journey toward God. So they adopted them to this purpose. Okay? And so as we look at this, and I think about some of the superstitions circulating about the moon, you could get moonstruck, quote unquote, and do some crazy things back in those, 1500 to 500 BCs. All right? It reflected the worldview of the pagans in which they were surrounded by. And so if you got moonstruck, you did crazy things at night. In fact, they will tell you to this day, some people have done studies, whether they're reliable or not, it's up for debate. Kids get conceived on full moon nights. More crime is committed on full moon nights. It's just, so they've done some studies. Some say it's legit, others say it's not. But what's not up for debate is a fact, and that is, what do we call someone who gets crazy? A lunatic, right? And craziness is lunacy. And so the word comes from lunar or moon. And in light of the superstition of the times, I know exactly what the psalmist is saying. When all the lunatics come out at night on this through hike, I have a friend who keeps telling me that God's right hand is going to protect me from all the lunatics, and I'm going to believe him. My buddy Colgate keeps telling me it's going to be okay. And whatever comes my way, whether it's day and I need shade, and it's night and I need shelter from the lunatics of life, God, Yahweh, will guide my steps. And I'm going to believe this guy, this trail magic guy that God has brought into my life. You see, the biblical way to express totality listen to me now. The biblical way to express totality was to name a pair of opposites, with the implication that this covered everything in between. So what do you think he's saying? If he's got a sun and moon opposite in the poem, what's he trying to convey? It's the psalmist's way of saying there will never be a time, day or night, that I'm not under the loving care and protection of God. Verse 7, slide 6, the Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. There it is again. Our morel mushroom tucked in the 8 verses. Watch over your life. Now, will we never have trouble? It doesn't say that in the psalm. When it speaks of the Lord watching over us day and night and keeping us from harm, it implies that we need watching, that there's some harmful stuff we're going to encounter. That's what the psalmist understands. In fact, in answer to the question, will we never have trouble, try to convince Apostle Paul that we'll never have trouble. A wonderful NT through hiker who hiked so many places in the Mediterranean world, 3 missionary journeys, some would argue 4 or 5 if you count a potential trip to Spain. This guy was an NT through hiker, a New Testament through hiker like no other. He covered the miles, man. Vibram souls couldn't keep up with this guy. He wore the sandals out. He stayed on the move. And he encountered dangers, guys. He encountered some really legitimate stuff. I mean, he was doing things for God, and God was really using his life, and he was pushing into new, uncharted territory for Christianity and the gospel. But this guy went through some crap. Now, I just said that in the message, okay? But he did. It was awful. And in fact, 2 Corinthians says, I've been flogged, he says. I've been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I got beat. 3 times I was beaten with rods. 5 times with lashes and evidently a cat of 9 tails. 3 times with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. Can you believe this? He's in the water. He's treading water, trying to find a piece of debris to hang on to because he's not sure if he's going to make it to shore. This is a rough, tough guy, an NT through hiker. He deserves all of our respect. He's been in danger from bandits, he says. In dangers from rivers, he says. In danger from my own countrymen, lunatics that come out at night. In danger from Gentiles. In danger in the city. In danger in the country. In danger at sea. In danger from false brothers. I have labored and toiled. I have gone without sleep for days on end. I have known hunger and thirst and calorie depletion and dietary modifications that I never care to repeat. I have been cold and naked and everything else. And on top of all of this, people are looking to me to be the ideal NT through hiker that always keeps my head above the water and stays positive with a good attitude. Okay? The amazing thing is that his God brought him through all of it. And he lived to write about it in a journal to the Corinthians. See? So harm will rear its ugly head on our through hike of life. But God preserves us. It's not just on through hikes, but through our daily life routines. Not only the imprisonments and the beatings and the shipwrecks and the crime scenes and the sleep deprivation, the cold and hungry nights and lonely seasons, but also on our errands when we go to work and back every day, in our recreation, on our ball fields, on our courts, in wherever we go, whatever we do, God is there. He's helping, He's guiding, He's directing. But like everybody else in life, Christ's followers, they slip sometimes. They tear ACLs in knees. They blow out Tommy John ligaments in elbows. Christ's followers, yes, they fall off ladders. They go weak or they wreck sometimes on four-wheelers. They get robbed. Yes, Christ followers get sunstroke. They suffer from illnesses. Their kids disobey sometimes. Their married couples argue and fight. There's financial reversals that plague us. Says Eugene Peterson, the Christian life is not a quiet escape to a garden where we can walk and talk uninterruptedly with our Lord. No, it's not that. That's not a very good picture. In fact, it's not a fantasy trip to a heavenly city where we finally get there and we compare blue ribbons and gold medals with others who have made it to the winner's circle. No, says Peterson. The Christian life is going to God. It's walking with God. Christians travel the same ground that everyone else walks on. They breathe the same air. They drink the same water. They shop in the same stores. They read the same newspapers. Are citizens under the same governments. They pay the same prices for groceries and gasoline, and they fear the same dangers. And I can't believe we're paying, now we think if we pay $3.50 a gallon, it's a good deal, isn't it? Isn't that crazy? We pay the same prices as everybody else for gas. We fear the same dangers. We are subject to the same pressures. We get the same distresses. We're buried in the same ground. The difference, friends, is that each step we walk, each breath of air that we breathe, we know that we're ruled by God. He is sovereign. He is sovereign to help in time of need. He is sovereign to guide us even before the harm arrives. And therefore, no matter what doubts we endure or what accidents we experience, the Lord will preserve us from evil. He will keep our life. And when I say preserve us from evil, He keeps the evil from getting inside of us. The psalm is pointing not in a direction of disorientation, but a direction of orientation toward God, who is our constant help. And if you think about it, if we're all exempted from harm, if there's this magical bubble that we all live inside of, and nothing can ever harm or hurt us, do you think we would believe and walk with God for the right reasons? If that was our guarantee? No, we would believe and walk with God because it paid well. But you see, the God-oriented through hiker understands something. God is with me. It may not always pay well, but I know He's with me no matter what I face. And there's no injury, there is no illness, there is no accident, there is no distress that will have evil power over my life, that will separate me from the purposes of God in my life. All the water in the oceans cannot sink a ship unless it gets inside. And nor can all the trouble in the world harm us unless it gets within us. That's the promise of Psalm 121. The Lord will keep you from all evil. Verse 8, the Lord will watch over, there's our morel mushroom again. He will watch over your coming and your going, both now and forevermore. Remember what I just said about opposites, all right? And when we want to express totality, we pit two things together that are opposites, like sun and moon, and we say everything in between. So here he says it again. He comes back and he names another pair of opposites in his poem. If I'm coming back, or if I'm heading to Jerusalem or away, if I'm going to work or home, if I'm straying from God or my way back to God, God watches over my life now and forevermore, whether it's this life or the life to come. When I sleep, He watches and keeps the lunatics at bay. When I'm awake and moving, He guides my steps. When I'm not, He directs me to shade. And when I think I can't go another step, another through hiker shows up on the trail with a little trail magic to enlighten my journey. A Colgate shows up and says, "You're made by God. You stay on the journey. Don't you quit." You see, I guess living life is a lot like climbing a mountain. It feels like, the pursuit of God is like the north face of God. It's this huge, incredible mountain we're trying to get up to try to understand God and His ways. And I think the psalmist understands that. The air is thin on the north face of God. You have to understand that, guys. It's thin. The heights can be dizzying. The clouds settle in as you try to ponder and research and figure out the searching questions that you have about life, about the seeming times when you slipped or when things aren't going the way that maybe this through hike had been pictured and the expedition had been planned, and it's not going the way that you had it all thought out and planned out. And then one day something happens and clouds rush in and riding on gale force winds, and these winds threaten to blow us off the north face of God. You learn that you have cancer, or that your spouse is having an affair, or your child has been arrested, or you have a terminal illness, of another type of terminal illness through which you can't really see solutions. Maybe a friend has betrayed you. And suddenly, the world and all its wonder doesn't seem so wonderful anymore. You're stuck on the north face of God, trying to climb this mountain that you've never been on before. The clouds cluster low. It's unbroken and relenting, and the fury of the tempest seems so personal. And it's all you can do to hunker down and hang on in those moments on the north face of God. And the summit of understanding seems so far away. And God seems so much like a Mount Everest of indifference. And what I'm holding out and what I'm proposing to you, the congregation of through hikers this morning, is that if we will look to Psalm 121 and we see this psalm as a rope that we spiritual explorers can hang on to, realizing there's some coming from behind that need us to hang on and divot that and spike that thing to the north face of God and refuse to move and budge and carabiner that rope in, and you can hang on to that rope and you can follow. And there's guys behind us that got to follow that. And we got to be faithful on the north face of God. And there's guys that have gone out in front of us that lead the way, and we kind of follow in their footsteps, and we're counting on them to lead the way. And Psalm 121 tells us that when we're roped with the right partner, a fellow through hiker on the north face of God, you can stay the course. And when the snows come in, they blind you on the journey, and your mind becomes disoriented because of the altitude. You'll stay steady, because God watches over. There's that morel mushroom again. He watches over. He watches over 5 times. He watches over you. We see it in the passage. They tell us that mountain climbers, when they climb at high altitudes, their thoughts become fuzzy. The logic can break down. A sense of direction is lost many times. There's so much disorientation. And Mount Everest, of course, the 29,000-foot mountain we all know about. Those who have attempted this gigantic feat of in the alpine climbing world know that there's a place on Mount Everest called the death zone. Essentially, it's the terrain that lies above 26,000 feet. So if we pull up, I think I got an Everest picture. There we go. There's some guys trying to make it to the top. It's just an incredible climb. And when you get above 26,000 feet, I learned that the lungs start expelling more carbon dioxide than they usually do. It throws off the blood's pH balance. And to correct the imbalance, the kidneys discharge more water, causing dehydration. And so at that altitude, the atmospheric pressure is only 30% of what it is at sea level. And so as a result of being in such thin air, the body takes in only 30% of the oxygen it needs to sustain itself. And to compensate, the heart races at a resting rate of 123 beats a minute, give or take a few. And in a desperate struggle for survival, the vital organs begin robbing the surrounding tissues of oxygen. And this is when the body begins its final breakdowns. You can only live 1 or 2 days at the most in the death zone before your body breaks down. You'll never make it off the mountain. The worst day in the history of Everest expeditions happened on May 10th, 1996. 10 expeditions were on the mountain, and it created a traffic jam near the summit. They were taking too long. Only a few hikers have the luxury of an hour on top. You've got to get up and you've got to get off because the storms can move in that quickly. It was a clear, beautiful day, much like we see in the picture. But there was this traffic jam at the top with these 10 expeditions, and people were taking too long, and the storm came barreling through, and visibility in a matter of minutes was cut to 2 feet. 2 feet in front of you is all you could see. More than 30 climbers, my document says, were instantly fighting for their lives, and it literally pinned them on the mountain. By morning, 8 climbers had lost their lives because they got caught in the death zone and couldn't get out soon enough. Something similar can happen on the north face of God. We want to know God. And we reach out to God and to try to discover God. And we're on this journey, this through-hike journey toward higher spiritual elevations. But then it happens. Like I said, our expedition doesn't go as planned, and we lose sight of God, and we forget how tender His feelings are toward us. We get disoriented, illogical even. We forget how dear we are to God. We forget about who we are to God. And we forget Psalm 121. And in the spiritual death zone, the Bible just becomes another book. The church just becomes another social group. Christ is just another religious magician. You see, in the death zone, truth itself is doubted. Grace gets obliterated. Love gets forgotten. Bitterness is we hang on to bitterness in the hot spots of life. Sin dominates one or more areas of our lives. Family disintegrates. Decisions get made. Lifestyle choices are made. Worldviews are set. And then when life comes with an unexpected storm, we're caught in the death zone. Many people bail off of the north face of God because they don't have a worldview that allows them to deal with this death zone bracket of life. They give up the expedition. One of the lives lost on Everest back in 1996 was Andy Harris. He was one of the expedition leaders of those 10 expeditionary teams. He was one of the leaders. Experienced, with a lot of know-how. But he made a fatal mistake that day. He stayed on the peak past the deadline. He stayed too long. It didn't allow him and his team enough time to get off the mountain. And on Harris's descent, he became in dire need of oxygen, and he radioed to base camp, and he said, I'm running out of oxygen. And in all the people who heard the radio transmission that had already made the descent, had said, no, there's scads of oxygen canisters scattered throughout the path and the trail and the descent trail and the path. They're right there. All he's got to do is grab one up, attach it to the apparatus. He can breathe the air that he needs to survive and to get mental clarity again. No, it's right there. Tell him it's right there. Tell Harris it's right there. We just came down. We saw him. They're right there. And yet he kept, camp. Yeah, I'm running out of oxygen. I'm running out of oxygen. These things are empty. I'm running out of oxygen. He was getting illogical in his head. The very oxygen he needed in his brain was sitting in his hand, and he couldn't figure out. No, I'm running out. These are empty. And he begins to panic in the death zone. The problem was that the lack of what he needed so disoriented his mind that though he was surrounded by a restoring supply, he continued to complain of his absence, holding it in his hand and asserting all the while, even though the very thing he held in his hand was absent in his brain, and it ravaged his capacity to recognize that he was clutching what he was clutching in his grasp. Harris was caught in the death zone. Maybe you're caught in a death zone of life on the north face of God. The air is thin. What has happened has made it hard to get your breath. The heights are dizzying. You feel disoriented, anxious, and unsure. Where will my help come from? In the words of the psalmist, the clouds have settled in and you can't see past this gale force threatening wind that is almost blowing you off the mountain, off the north face of God. Can I encourage you and can I argue this morning that the solution you're reaching for is the canister of Psalm 121. It's right in your hands. It's right there. And you may be so disoriented right now that you resemble Andy Harris. The very oxygen you need is right in front of you. Can I exhort you this morning? Clip in and follow the rope of Psalm 121 home. It will take you home, no matter what the passageways you have to pass through. Your help comes from the Lord. He will guide your every step. He will watch over you day and night. He's that shadowy presence that never leaves your side. If you've lost your footing and your legs feel weak and you're in need of shade and rest and security, can I offer to you the oxygen bearer, the spiritual life giver? Can I offer to you Jesus, the through hiker, whose legs were once weak and trembling from exhaustion. In fact, he fell under the load of a cross beam and he struggled to make it to the top of a hill called Calvary. He baked in the hot Middle Eastern sun for about 6 hours one Friday. There was no shade. Only a criminal was at his right hand rather than this shadowy presence of a living God. He could see the mountains in the distance, but bearing the sinner's curse, there was no helper that could deliver him from this journey. The heavens felt indifferent as he was trying to climb this north face of God in his humanity. He bore the humanity's transgressions, and he recognized that in that symbolic substitutionary moment, no help could arrive for him because God was doing something cosmic for the world. He felt abandonment, totally exposed on the north face of God. And in fact, it was rebellious humanity that was exposed on the north face of God. And the only way we can survive the death zone is the presence of such great holiness is to personally receive what Jesus has done for all of us. The only way. He absorbed the full brunt of the sinner's storm so that all of us could safely get to the summit and finally see what a holy yet loving God was really like. Maybe you feel you've entered a death zone of sorts and you'd like some through hikers to kind of gather around and pray for you today before we let you go. This is the beginning of a travel season. Maybe you've got some big roads ahead. Maybe you're going to places like Africa or Alaska or boot camp. Maybe you're going on a journey with your family. Maybe it's the camping season for you and you're packing up and you just, man, I just want God to bless our camping this year. Maybe that's where you're at. If you would like to just have a prayer with together with the family of God here this morning, we invite you to do that. And maybe your prayer would go something like this: God, I want to know you. I want to keep climbing on the north face of God, even though the gales have assailed and the passageways are dangerous. There's so much to discover on the north face of God. I don't want to be run off from the north face of God based on what I'm going through. I want to stay there because I know that's where God will meet me. And if I ever summit, I want to know that my life perspective will never be the same with God, because you can walk with me and talk with me and guide me and give me a new view of life. Give me Jesus. That's who I need in the death zones of life. Maybe that's you. I'm going to have them play if they would. I will lift up my eyes. Just play that one first. And then we'll just, anybody that wants to come and I'll just pray a prayer of dedication over you and your journeys, over you and your life through hikes that you're going through right now. The body and the elders, if you would, elders, please come up and just gather around those who might come, whether it's one or whether it's a dozen. Just come up and we're going to just lay hands on the ones closest to us, and we're going to pray together. And we're going to hold on to Psalm 121, this oxygen of spiritual life that we all need. Just play it for us, if you would. Just feel free to come on up. Leave the lights down, that's fine. Come on up here and let us pray for you. Okay?
I know I can't make it on my own.
Anybody?
I'm always searching.
Well, Pastor, I want you to pray for me. I'm on the north face of God, and I'm not sure where my next guy. Just come on up. Just stay right here in the front, guys. Chad, Carrie, just stay right here. Anybody else? We're going to pray for you. The Lord will give you a good summer season. He'll bring you through the stuff you're going through. He'll be your strength, okay? He'll be your strength. He's your God. You don't abandon Him. Stay on the journey. Colgates and others will show up just in time. They'll give you the word you need, the strength you need, the encouragement you need. Don't abandon the journey. Life is an unexpected adventure, right? There's surprises on the footpath of life. And I never cease to be amazed at how God shows up in just the right moment. He'll show up for you this morning. There's a little trail magic for you this morning. No matter where you're at, you stay faithful. Stay faithful. He's faithful. She's going to keep singing, and after she's done, if we're still here praying, just play the other one too. Okay, they're both kind of based on Psalm 121. Anybody else, just feel free to, yes, come on up. We'll wait just a few more seconds here. God's going to be your strength. Elders are ready to pray for you. We're going to dedicate you guys. We're going to bless your journey. Amen. Come on up, be a part of the send-off here. We want you to be safe all summer long. Okay, God's faithful. He's faithful. We're just going to pray that He'll protect and keep His hand on you. Despite the muddy trails you're going to be on and slippery passageways, we're going to pray God will just watch over you. Okay? Let's just pray together, shall we? God, thank you for this morning. Thank you for your grace and your strength. We appreciate your presence in our lives, and we come today because we know that life is unexpected. It's an adventure. Boy, we all can vouch for that. It's an adventure. There's harm, dangers of harm and dangers of storms and the unexpected. We know this. But God, I ask and pray this morning that your strength would be given to these, especially who are here this morning, and some are sitting and some are standing here in front. And I just know, God, that they're reaching for the canister of Psalm 121. Where will my help come from? Where will it come from? Will it be the mountains? Oh, they're beautiful, but it's not what we need sometimes. Will it be the pagan philosophies of the world? No, I don't think that's going to be the answer. I don't think it's the fortune cookies at the restaurants are going to do it. I just think it needs to be something a whole lot more substantial than horoscopes and fortune cookies and pagan shrines and worldview systems that really are shallow ways to view and live life. Here are people, men and women, boys and girls, who are making a through-hike journey. And I pray your strength to be theirs. God, help them to know where every step needs to be taken, what every trail they need to take and pursue. Help them when they rest at night. You would be their strength. You would multiply your power in their lives. And you would rejuvenate them for what the tomorrows of life will bring and hold for them. We ask and pray, dear God, that you'll give them shade. Some of them feel exposed. They feel exposed to so many things and vulnerable. And whatever that is in their lives, I pray that your shadowy, shady presence would come and settle in over them right now. And as they make their plans, as they travel across the country, or by foot or by plane or by car, that as they travel and they say come and they go, and as they go to work and come home, and as they process life and as they do life with their little ones, I ask and pray that you'll be their strength, your protection. God, help them to hold on and have your peace right now. Give your peace Give your strength. There's chaos. There's hot spots. There's disorientation. There's disillusionment. There's discouragement. Give your peace. Speak it now. And we think of how you breathe over your disciples. May you breathe over these through hikers here this morning. Be with them now as they reach out. Take hold of a through hiker's arm and hand. Purpose to make this journey on the north face of God, to keep climbing, keep believing, keep trusting. You do this for these individuals this morning. We ask this in Jesus' name. By night or by day, on long or short journeys, up hills or down hills, through valleys, across rivers, through passageways, on top of peaks and ridges, God, wherever they go, whomever they meet, bring someone into their life with some trail magic that will let them know that you're still there every step of the way. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. We'll just keep praying for you guys. Thank you, elders, for praying. Thank you, guys, for being here. He's your strength. Let's all stand together, shall we? Stand together. God is good. If you want to hang around and talk, I'm here. Be happy to talk to you for as long as we need. Otherwise, you have a great day. Stay on the journey and come next week for another stage of this journey. Okay? Blessings. Have a great day.